I love the game. I like the money, and the money is certainly a method of keeping score. But I don't do things for money. I do things because I enjoy doing them. That really sometimes can translate into more money than you would have made if you went just after the money.
When you love what you do, when you really love what you do, you work harder. So you've got to love what you do.
If I didn't enjoy it, if I didn't really love what I'm doing, I wouldn't be successful. I wouldn't be sitting with you today.
What's the implication of that for someone watching this who wants to create greater wealth? What's the message in that, do you think?
Well, the message is you have to love what you do. If you do it for the money alone, it's probably not going to work. I have friends where I tell them, get out of this business, which is a good business, and go into another business, which isn't as good a business, because they like the other business better. They'll do better in a less good business, so to speak, than they will in the better business because they like it.
Sometimes in life, to be successful, oftentimes, most of the time, you have to follow your instincts. You have to follow your gut. You have to. Your parents may say wrong, your whoever may say wrong, but you have to do it. Ever give up. I know people that are very smart. They went to the Wharton School of Finance with me. I know other people that aren't as smart, and those people are the top people in industry today, and they just were tougher. They didn't give up. And the smart ones had everything on their plate. They'd always come in with the A+ on the tests and the good boards and everything else. But when they ran into problems, they didn't know how to solve the problems like the guys that weren't as good. And it's very seldom that you see something other than this happen. So never, ever give up.
You know, there's a story that my father told, and he thought it was a great, funny story. I didn't. And it was about a man who wanted to start a cola company. And he started it, and he called it 3-Up. And you know where this is going. Yeah. And then he failed. He went bankrupt. He went out of business. He said, I'm not giving up. And he called it 4-Up. And then he called it 5-Up. And then he failed again, and he called it 6-Up. And ultimately, he said, I quit. I give up. And you know what? If he wouldn't have quit, he would have had 7-Up. You've got to be into the details, because if you're not, they'll come back to haunt you. So oftentimes, you know, life is in the details. Well, business also is in the details. You have to be very careful. You have to watch the dotted I's, because you can really lose tremendously if you don't watch those details. So we discussed that, and as Robert likes to say, probably more than I do, that's the little finger. But it's all about the details. It's very important. Right. Sometimes you have fear of things, and there's nothing wrong with having it, but try not to show it. When you keep getting rejected, when you keep hearing the no, you have to learn that there's a reason for no. What is it? Now, why are they saying no to me? Why is it that they keep saying no? You have to figure it out, because you know what? If they say no and no and no, and you keep saying no, maybe you're doing something wrong. You have to learn how to take that no and change it into a yes. So oftentimes, it's those no's that can make a life a lot better than those yeses.
The harder I work, the luckier I get. And he wins the US Open. You have all these big, handsome guys, these big, giant guys, and they're hitting the ball a mile. And you have Gary Player. And Gary Player would win the Open. He'd win the Masters. He'd win this. He'd win that. And he said, you know, hey, in the US Open, he hit a 5-iron to 1 foot from the hole, and he ended up getting a birdie and wins the US Open, right? And he came off the green. Now, I know I've heard the statement before, but I heard it from him in a meaningful way. They said, what do you think, Gary? What is it? He said, all I know is I've been working very hard. And the harder I work, the luckier I get. I thought it was an amazing statement.
There are a lot of bad people out there. And you really have to go, if you have a problem with someone, you have to go after them. And it's not necessarily to teach that person a lesson. It's to teach all of the people that are watching a lesson, that you don't take crap. And if you take crap, you're just not going to do well. So be smart, be sharp, It's all about this. You have to have this to start off with. But you can't take a lot of nonsense from people. You have to go after them. I've always believed it.
I always notice that busy people, people that are very successful in many cases, have a lot going on their desk. I have papers from deals. I have papers from just about everything. I like to read up on things. I like to study what I'm doing. So therefore, you have a lot of action going on in your office. Now, some of the writers, some of the ones that aren't so smart, they talk about the desk negatively. They say, oh, isn't it terrible? Trump has so many papers on his desk. Let's analyze everything on the desk. And they do the best and they fail. But the fact is, I've noticed over the years, successful people have a lot going on their desk. My desk is in my office. My desk is a very important part of me. And frankly, it's a very important part of my success. Everything I do comes right through this desk. So if it's not perfectly neat, if there's a lot of action, I think that's okay. I actually think that's a good thing. You can't take your eye off the ball. When I had troubles in the early 90s, a major article came out and it said very strongly, everything he touches turns to gold. And I believed it. So I'd go out with models at night instead of working. But that wasn't good. And I remember I had a big lease coming up and there was a big show and I went to the show. I said, don't worry, fellas, you can handle the lease, you'll get it done. Well, I came back, they didn't get it done, and I would have had it done 100%. And then the market crashed in the 90s. So I had trouble, but it was sort of an amazing, I wouldn't want to do it again. It was an amazing test of yourself. Can you handle pressure? How are you under pressure?
But being an entrepreneur is a special talent.
Because I really have a theory that some people are not destined to make a lot of money, and that's fine, and they can be very happy. In fact, they can be much happier by not. Those people shouldn't be, because they'll ruin their lives. I mean, they'll go and they'll put up their house and they'll mortgage their cars and everything else they own, and they'll go into business, and they shouldn't necessarily be in business. Not everybody is meant to be a business person.
You have to see yourself. You have to really believe in yourself. And sometimes it's hard. You know, you've had failures, you've had weaknesses, you've had other things. You have to see yourself as a one-man band. Don't rely too much on other people because they'll let you down. You have to see yourself as victorious. And to be a winner, you have to think like a winner. If you don't think like a winner, it's just never going to happen.
You have to be able to size up your opponent. I call them an opponent because when they're on the other side of the table, that's what they are. They're an opponent. If you can't do that, then it's called get a job.
Let's suppose that I have a job, but I have the feeling that I want to start my own business. How would I know that I'm the right kind of person for the entrepreneurial life?
To me, that's the best question you've asked, and it's also the toughest. Somebody has a family, has a job, they have a nice job, they get X dollars a week, they don't have to worry about very much, it's not going to be great, they're not going to live in Palm Beach, but you know what? They have a job, and it's income coming in. The hardest thing to do, in my opinion, in business, is to leave that job and become an entrepreneur, because you're risking your wealth, you're risking your family, your health, your family's health. You're really risking a lot. You have to know in your gut whether or not you have it to be an entrepreneur. Can you handle pressure? Can you handle all of the problems that you're going to be confronted with? And there'll be many, many problems. But the toughest job that somebody has, in my opinion, in business, is to know when to get out of something and when to go in something, because that's a very, very risky proposition. I have a friend who was not successful at all, but was really up and coming. And he had a thing. He would only fly first class. I'm not saying do this because for somebody it won't work, but he needed that mentally.
Right.
He wanted to fly first class because mentally he wanted to think he was the best, and that's it. And even though he didn't have much money at the time, this is years ago, he would always fly. I used to criticize him, but it put him in a good state of mind, and he became a very, very successful guy.
Yes.
Very, very successful. And I've always remembered that. He would never fly coach. He would always fly first class, even though he didn't have the means to fly. So, look, it's complicated, but whatever it takes to train that. Against the tide is great if it works. Now, it doesn't always work, and you really have to be smart to go against the tide because you're going against a lot of smart people. But when you get it right, you'll end up better, whether it's Microsoft or Google. I mean, so many people that have really hit big have gone against the tide. But you have to have great confidence in yourself. You have to be the right person. There are very few people that can pull it off, but when you pull it off, it's great. Same thing in real estate. You go against the tide. People are selling, you're buying, the tide changes. I've always believed in positive thinking. At the same time, I don't want to mislead. I also believe in aspiring, in terms of what you're doing, aspiring to protect against the downside. You can't just be this wonderful guy walking around, everything's positive, because unfortunately, that's not the way the world is. I love to tell people to think about the challenges so that when they do come along, you're ready.
What would be one word of advice you would have for an upcoming businessman, for a future businessman?
Knowledge. Knowledge. But if it's one word's very hard for that, but the word is knowledge. But you get knowledge through experience. One of the things people talk about is luck. And I do believe that people are lucky, and some people are luckier than others. I do believe that. But there's also an expression, the harder you work, the luckier you get. And I can tell you 10 instances where I didn't quit when it was 1990, the world was coming down, the debt markets were to everybody, all of my friends and enemies were going bankrupt. I never did. And the times were actually just terrible. And even today, you look at times and you see what happens, and you have to learn. But the word luck is very interesting. But if I didn't work really hard, I probably would not, almost definitely would not be here today. And unless you had me up as a man who at one point was successful, but let's see what a loser looks like. So you have to work hard, because it is true, you can develop luck through hard work. Well, one of the things I say in the book, and I say very strongly, is you have to be paranoid. And the book is selling so well, and I guess people believe this, but there is a certain advantage to having a certain degree of paranoia. You watch, you can be a little bit careful, you watch what's happening behind your back, and I think that's probably very true in business.
If you're paranoid, how much enjoyment is there? I mean, how much time do you have to actually sit back and say, look what I've done, this is great?
I think that there's great enjoyment. I think that the paranoia cannot be carried to a life-shattering crisis point, but I think it's good to always know that people are out there and they're looking to throw you off your throne. But I think success brings great enjoyment, and certainly it has for me. But a lot of that was early upbringing. I'd always say to them, no drugs, no alcohol, no cigarettes. And now I add for Barron, and I'd drive them crazy. I'd say every time they'd leave, no drugs, no alcohol, no cigarettes. Repeat after me, and I'd have to repeat. They'd go, Ivanka would go, Dad, will you leave me alone? But I'd drum it into their heads. And you know, you have to get through those artificial barriers. I call them artificial barriers because you can do something about it until it's too late. Once it's in your system, it's very hard to stop. Like, I don't drink, and it's very easy for me not to drink. I tell people, what are you drinking for? What are you drinking for? And they don't even understand what I'm saying.
So
because
how did you, it's amazing when people see you, they can't imagine. No alcohol,
Oh, would I be in trouble if I was a drinker? With my life?
No smoking.
Yeah, no smoking. Well, I had
And
a
no
brother.
drugs.
I had a brother, Fred, who was sadly an alcoholic, a serious alcoholic, and he was the best-looking guy you've ever seen.
No, he was much older than you.
He was much older. He was 10 years older than me, 11 years older than me, and he was as good-looking a guy as you've ever seen. He had everything going. The best personality. I have like a bad personality compared to Fred, but he started drinking, and he also smoked a lot. But he started drinking, and I think it started in college, frankly, but it got progressively worse. And he was really unable to stop. And he'd always tell me, don't you ever drink. So he was much older than me, and it really has an impact, you know, when you have that kind of an age difference. But he'd point, don't you ever drink and don't you ever smoke. He'd add the smoke in it because he smoked and he drank. And it hugely affected his health and hugely affected even his look and his, you know, the whole bearing. And every time he'd see me, he'd say, don't you ever drink and don't you. So I never drank. I mean, I really, when you talk about my father, I learned a lot from my father, but I learned a lot from my brother Fred. And he set an example. It wasn't maybe the example that people would think, but it really was, in its own way, an example. Well, I think that rich men, I guess, are always targets. Rich people are always targets. And I think that there's a level of celebrity that I've attained which has become so ridiculous now that it makes me an even bigger target. So it always bothers me, but there's really not much I can do about it. I mean, I can't
Ridiculous
help it.
in what way, the celebrity level?
Well, it's just become very tough to go out. It's very tough to do things. It's very tough to just even go to a restaurant, in a sense, because it's always shaking hands and signing autographs and things. And, you know, it didn't used to be that way.
But that's a symbol of success, is it?
It is, but
You're a victim of your own success.
It's not necessarily a good symbol. It's really, it causes lots of problems. I mean, you go out and you want to have dinner at a restaurant with a group of people, and it ends up being a big event, and you have people waiting at the entrance to the. It's just a very tough way to lead a life, I find.
We met an adorable 10-year-old girl named Megan. Now, Megan was born with brittle bone disease.
Hi, Megan. My name's Donald, and you probably don't know me, but I was watching Maury's show the other day, and I must tell you, you really hit me right here. I think you are so beautiful, and both inside and out. I had a little something, a little gift that I gave to Maury, who's a friend of mine, and a very good golfer. Don't ever play him in golf. He's very, very good, believe me. And I gave him a little gift for you, and I hope you and your mother have a good time with it. And you're very special, and you just keep it up and keep up that attitude. So good luck, and you stay in touch.
So, Donald Trump, he has his name on more buildings in New York City than any other person. And besides that, he is one of the most generous people I know. And he wants you and your mom to have a very special check. And when we talk about Donald Trump, when he gives out checks, we're not talking chump change here. This is big time money. So look at that. Do you know how much that's for? Did you get all those zeros right?
Hi, Donald. Good. I really wanted to say thank you very much. Bye. I told him that I thanked him, and he said, well, you're very welcome, and he told me to keep up the good work.